Hey guys, this lecture will focus on the weaknesses of the budget in achieving external stability. Now, to remind ourselves what external stability is, briefly it means that there is a low CAD to GDP ratio, a sustainable net foreign debt, and a stable dollar. So if the CAD to GDP ratio is around 3 to 4%, our net foreign debt is sustainable and we have a stable dollar, it means that Australia is living within its means and therefore able to pay its way in its financial obligations. So this lecture will focus on what the weaknesses of the budget in moderating aggregate demand has in achieving external stability. Now we're going to assume that the budget is purely a demand management policy. As we know, sometimes the budget can be aggregate supply orientated, but for the purposes of this lecture, we're just going to focus on the budget as a purely demand management policy. Okay, so we're going to look at three major weaknesses of the budget in achieving external stability. So the first weakness is that there are often long time lags between activity, implementation, and impact. So what this means is, to put it simply, that sometimes economic activity or the measurement of economic activity are known as lagging indicators. So most obviously the two lagging indicators that we're going to focus on are the calculation of GDP and inflation. Now, as we know, GDP affects this CAD to GDP ratio and inflation affects our international competitiveness. And in both cases, they're measured after the event has occurred. So what happens here is, although at the start of the year we may have a very low CAD to GDP ratio, assuming that the GDP has significantly dropped within the year, it is not until at the end of the year that the ABS goes and collects the data for the previous year's GDP and therefore recognizes that there is a problem. And same with inflation, even though it's calculated every month or every quarter, I should say, inflation rates may change during that quarter, and it's not until the end of the quarter, when the CPI is released, that the ABS or the government realizes that there is a problem. So in often cases, these lagging indicators actually don't represent economic reality. And so what happens is that the implementation of policies, or especially discretionary stabilizers, in order to help achieve external stability, may either be pro-cyclical or too late to actually have an impact on this achievement of a low CAD to GDP ratio. So again, furthermore, to these long time lags between activity and actual recognition, is that the idea that these policies to be implemented, they would actually have to go through Parliament or legislation, and therefore this would actually represent a very long time process before they could actually implement to help achieve external stability. So to help slow aggregate demand, they might tax people more or to encourage savings, but these savings measures may in fact take a long time to actually implement, and therefore the impact of which may even be a longer time between the activity here and the actual impact later on in time. So the main problem associated with this is that this reduces the effectiveness of BP, which goes as a short acronym for budgetary policy. This is not recognized, but for simplicity, I'm just going to write BP in the short run, so in the SR, but in the short run. So that's the first weakness associated with budgetary policy, is that there are often large time lags or long time lags between activity implementation, so activity of recognition, then implementation, and then finally impact of the policy. Okay, so the second issue is that there is a possible conflict with, or trade-off with, other goals. And the major three goals that we're going to look at are: 1, full employment; 2, strong growth; and 3, equity in income distribution. Okay, so how does the achievement of external stability affect these three goals? Well, we talked about how external stability can be helped achieved by the budget through budgetary measures to slow aggregate demand. And if you want to refresh yourself of how this occurs, simply go to our lectures on how the budget can slow aggregate demand, either through an increase or encouraging national savings, or through automatic and discretionary stabilizers. But we know that the budget can slow aggregate demand and therefore decrease this current account to GDP ratio, and therefore help the economy move towards external stability. But as we know, due to the operations of the circular flow, that when aggregate demand decreases, there is less need for businesses to employ people, and therefore this increases unemployment. So when demand decreases, production decreases, and therefore demand for labor decreases. So this goal of full employment may be compromised. And again, because production decreases, growth, or economic growth, will weaken. So because we're slowing aggregate demand, we want to start exporting more. We want to start exporting more, and so we want to consume less of our domestic goods, and therefore this slow aggregate demand would actually weaken economic growth overall, because of due to this production or decreases in production. And again, where we want to export more to help increase revenue from the CAD, or credit from the CAD, where exports increase and imports decrease, we will see that income distribution will be swayed or distorted to exporters. So exporters will be better off, and where importers, because imports decrease, we will see that importers would be worse off in their income. So income distribution would be, there would be a movement in equity in income distribution towards exporters and a movement away from importers. And so that would not help achieve an equitable distribution of income among the economy. And lastly, we have this idea that aggregate supply is also important. So assuming that the budget is simply a demand management policy and it neglects aggregate supply. But in reality, we know that the budget can also be an aggregate supply management policy. And we'll talk about how budget can be an aggregate supply management policy in further lectures. But in this instance, because contractionary budgetary measures can help reduce the cyclical CAD by slowing growth in aggregate demand, it fails to tackle this structural CAD. So it tackles a cyclical CAD in the economy, but it fails to account for a structural or a supply side current account deficit. And so because Australia typically has weak supply side conditions, so we have a very low exportable base. We can only export minerals because we can't compete in manufacturing or other industries with overseas. This would actually lead to a larger current account deficit because of our need to import, say, manufactured textiles and other things which require labor resources. Because of our high labor costs, we become less competitive internationally, and therefore we will start to import more because of our low aggregate supply domestically. So our CAD will worsen, and therefore when our CAD worsens, the net foreign debt accumulated throughout the years would also decrease, and that would contribute to a weak dollar. So our international purchasing power, or our real exchange rate, would actually deteriorate. So they're the weaknesses of the budget as purely a demand management policy in achieving this goal of external stability. So there are three major weaknesses. And to recap, we have long time lags between activity recognition, implementation, and finally impact. Secondly, we have a possible conflict with other economic goals such as full employment, economic growth, and equity and income distribution. And finally, how this demand management policy of the budget to slow aggregate demand doesn't really actually account for aggregate supply side factors that contribute to our large current account deficit.